Hi guys, today we're going to be looking at a highly requested topic, the top 10 most silent keyboard switches of all time. This video took me a long time to make because I had to go out and acquire a whole bunch of keyboards with silent switches, but now it's finally here. Before I start, a quick word on how I rank these switches. The only thing I judged here is how silent they are. The key feels treated as completely irrelevant in the video. I recorded typing demos for each keyboard, back to back and under identical conditions, and compared audio levels to help me make a decision, because it was sometimes quite close. Also, I did comparisons of bare switches as well as tests of multiple switches in the same chassis as much as possible to minimize the effect of the keycaps and the chassis on the sound, which was sometimes a major factor. So if you hear an entrant that's ranked higher or lower than it sounds like it should be, it's because the keyboard itself is making it sound louder or softer than it should, and I corrected for that. The spacebar in particular can often dominate the sound, but again, that's not really a factor of the switches, so be careful not to let that skew your perception. Of all the boards in this video, only 3 had a spacebar that wasn't loud as fuck. Also, I only looked at commercially available switches, because if you take looped and custom silenced switches into account, the amount of possibilities becomes endless and making a video about it would be impossible as well as useless. Kicking off at number 10, we have Topre switches. While most switches on this list are deliberately silenced or dampened in some way, Topre is, and remains of course, a rubber dome switch, so it's inherently fairly silent. That said, the rubber dome mat only suppresses keystrokes on the way down, leaving quite a noisy upstroke, and this is why it doesn't score higher on the list. Next up at number 9 we have Alps SKCM Cream Damped and its slightly louder sister switch SKCM White Damped. It's been absolute ages since I covered these, but they're essentially tactile Alps except with a dampening rubber inside the slider, which is this little figure of 8 thing here. They are noisier on the downstroke than Topre, but Topre peak higher than these do because of the upstroke, which is why I've often mentioned that silencing the upstroke is just as important as silencing the downstroke. At number 8 we have something I haven't featured on the channel yet, but it's Matias quiet click switches. The name for these is utterly stupid as these switches don't click at all, they're tactile, but anyway they're basically a modernized clone of the previous entrant, dampened Alps. They're only a little bit quieter, but it's definitely noticeable and the pitch is different as well. I'm not completely sure what's causing the difference, but I think it might be the added lubricant, the different plastic in the housing, or probably a combination of both. In any case, the result is superior dampening with regards to sound levels. This board also has one of the most effectively dampened spacebars as well as the deepest sounding one. Next up is another Matias switch, the much more elusive quiet linear switch. This one was developed for stenographers and has no equivalent in Alps' old catalogue. It includes a liberally greased linear leaf for stabilization as well as dampeners. However, compared to the tactile Matias switches, the ones on the linears protrude a lot more from the stem, which results in a mushier feeling but also a noticeably softer sound, also helped by it not being tactile, which tends to louden up switches. This is one of the ones where it sounds louder than the previous entrants because the AT101 I mounted them in is a very loud chassis due to its hollow structure and thin ABS keycaps, but take it from me that the switches themselves are actually quieter. Then at number 6 we have good old standard rubber domes, the kind you'd find in any office nowadays. Because relative silence is one of the very few strong points of modern rubber dome keyboards, I've decided to include them in this list, which also gives you an indication of how silent the mechanical alternatives are compared to this one. This is a HP KB0316, one of the most common office keyboards out there. The key feel is horrible and I wouldn't recommend it at all, but the rubber dome mat does absorb a lot of sound, so if silence is really your primary concern and you don't want to spend any money, a generic office keyboard like this might actually be not that crazy of a choice. Regardless, it should serve as a good reminder that a generic office keyboard is actually really quiet compared to mechanicals, even specifically silenced ones. It's also got a remarkably silent spacebar. You can hear the slightest of stab rattle, but considering they didn't even try to silence it, it's remarkable. And this also gives it the most consistent sound level of all the keyboards in this video. At number 5, we have a switch type I went over very recently, Cherry MX Silent. This keyboard, the Leopold FC900R, actually has a dampening mat inside the chassis, so it makes the switches sound more silent than they might otherwise have sounded, but it's still a very quiet switch overall. Despite having a very similar dampening design to Alps switches, they turned out to be a lot quieter, and I think this is because of a mixture of the housing on Cherry switches being less roomy, as well as the rubber poking outside of the slider further. Next, at number 4, we have Zilents, which are a dampened, tactile MX type design by ZealPC. These are a little bit different from MX silent switches with a differently shaped slider, and the rubbers are different as well. They were designed to poke out less in order to reduce the mushiness that the dampeners normally bring to a key feel, and to reduce the travel less than MX silent switches do. Despite how this might make it sound like it would make it louder than MX Silent, especially considering it's tactile rather than linear, it's actually not. The sound levels are virtually identical, although the spacebar in this chassis is a lot louder than in the Leopold. That said, tested next to each other in this chassis, they sound just as loud, so for the tiebreaker I went with the bassier of the two, which are the Zilents. They definitely have a deeper sound. In terms of actual noise levels, they're very close though. Getting into the top 3, we have Type S Topre switches. These are Topre switches with factory-fitted silencing rings to dampen the upstroke. They are found on PFU's Type S HHKB, and although you can also get these aftermarket, these are stock, so they still qualify for this Top X video. These switches are the reason this video took so long to make, as PFU and Topre completely gave me the silent treatment, but I managed to borrow these two in the end. One of the two comes with a PFU silencing mat underneath, which slightly silences the board further yet and makes the sound much less hollow. That one should arguably be disqualified, but even if it was, it wouldn't change its position in this Top X, and I figured you might find it an interesting comparison, so I included typing demos of both. Note that despite the very effective silencing of the switches, they seem to have completely forgotten the spacebar, which is actually the loudest in the entire video, so keep in mind that the switches themselves are a lot quieter than the utterly thunderous spacebar might suggest. At number 2, we have our runner-up, Apple scissor switches. When I reviewed one of these, my main conclusion was that these aren't that bad, but that they would be a lot better if they changed everything. That said, I know a lot of people swear by them, and in all fairness that might be because of the noise, because apart from the super rattly spacebar, it is an exceptionally quiet keyboard. Even though it's ridiculously overpriced, very unreliable, gets dirty at a record pace, has turbo shit keycaps, and has, in my opinion at least, a somewhat uncomfortable and awkward key feel, if you want silence in your office, there's very little that can beat it. Then finally at number 1 we have what's actually not really a surprise when you think about it. A foldable silicone keyboard. As much as it pains me to say, even though this is one of the worst feeling keyboards ever made, with by far and away the most spongy, gooey, nutty, rubbery, greasy, slimy key feel I've tried so far, this hideous contraption, which I've nicknamed the breast implant, is unfortunately also easily the most silent option available. May whatever god you do or do not believe in have mercy on your sorry-ass soul if your tolerance for typing noise is so low that you'll have to stoop to this level of keyboard-based agony. Whisperingly quiet, basically the only sound is that of your fingertips getting stuck to the plastic cover through your skin oils and subsequently ripping them off, which is pretty gross when you think about it, but it's quiet to hear at least. That's it for this Top X video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments below, and see you next time.